Okay. Should be easy and Bud's work is in shape. All right. Start about 5 minutes.
Are we ready? Thank you, everyone, for coming out on this very rainy night. I was wondering what kind of an attendance we might get tonight. I thought a few people might show up. I think this is absolutely wonderful that so many people came out on a night like tonight to learn a little bit more about the flat tax. And that's why I'm here, is to learn more about the flat tax. And we have an esteemed group of panelists here this evening, which will give us a lot of information. We have room questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions, please. In coming in, you were given these cards. They're on the tables. You can ask for them. We'll have people, he's over there, handing them out. And on these cards, fill out the questions, and we will do our best to answer them. Now, on the back, it also says optional demographic information. If you want to put your name and email on there, you can. You're not required to do that, so we don't know who you are. But if you want more information, you will be getting more information about the flat tax, and as it progresses through the state legislature, possibly to the governor's office or whatever, you will be able to get that information if you give the email here. Otherwise, we really don't care who you are, but we do care about your questions. Thanks to the Arizona Ecumenical Council for their sponsorship of this forum and the Bisbee Forum. That's tomorrow night. We want to thank the Temple Emmanuel for hosting this presentation, but most of all, we want to thank you all for coming out this evening. My name is Bud Foster. I'm a reporter for KOLB TV, and I'm your moderator tonight. Last night I hosted another event, and at that event we gave out a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction presentations, and so I spent 4.5 hours listening to rock and roll and other forms of music, and so it was pretty loud and raucous. I'm hoping tonight is not quite as loud and raucous as last night, but you know, if you have something you want to say, don't hesitate to say it. We certainly encourage your participation tonight. Our host this evening is Paula Abowd, the state senator from here in Tucson. She sits on multiple committees at the legislature, including Finance Appropriations, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, which, as you well know, is a very big one, and of course, the Health Committee. And I'll ask Paula to say a few words.
Can't thank you all enough for coming out tonight. The point of these forums and what motivated and inspired me to host these is that this flat tax bill came this close to passing in the Arizona legislature and the public knew nothing about it. This flat tax, and it's an Arizona flat tax, it is not a federal flat tax, but this flat tax will raise taxes, according to the Arizona Department of Revenue, on 8 out of 9 Arizonans. And you don't get to vote on it because they'll give a tax cut to the highest individuals and make the bottom 8 out of 9 increase their taxes to pay for the tax cut that the higher individuals, the wealthier individuals will pay. And because it's revenue neutral, you, the citizens, don't get to vote on it. So my purpose in hosting a series of 8 to 10 forums in southern Arizona is to wake up the public and to allow you to have an informed voice to communicate with your legislators and the governor. And we know that this bill is coming before the legislature again. The sponsor, Representative Steve Court from Mesa, is bringing this bill back. The only reason he held this bill was because the military and the realtors recognized that the loss of all the deductions and exemptions were going to dramatically hurt the military and realtors. And so they applied some pressure. However, we've heard that Representative Court is he's going to take into consideration their issues and possibly exempt them so that they will support the bill. But that still means that ordinary citizens' pocketbooks are going to be hurting with these increased taxes. So we've provided some literature for you. We will reference them. We have a wonderful panel tonight, and I just thank you so much for coming. We'll have questions and answers, and we'll all talk a little bit more. We don't need to get everything said in our opening comments, but we hope by the end of the evening that all your questions will be answered. Again, thank you all for coming and educating yourself. And the ultimate goal is to be able to contact your legislators. So don't leave here without noticing that on the back of the yellow sheet, the call to action tells you who your legislators are, how they voted, and how they support this piece of legislation, so that you can communicate with them intelligently. Thank you all so much.
Okay, Paula, thank you very much. And then when you do fill out your questions, make them as legible as possible, if you possibly could, because we think that they're very important. And again, we have an esteemed group of panelists here this evening, and I will introduce each one of them, and then they will have an opening statement, an opening presentation about the flat tax. First is Dr. Alberta Charney. Dr. Charney is an Economic and Business Research Center faculty member at the U of A. She's been at the U of A since 1977, where she's considered an expert on tax analysis, regional economic forecasting, and impact analysis, among other areas of expertise. She has built numerous revenue and economic forecasting models for Arizona and the legislature, and her diverse academic publications have appeared in numerous journals, quarterlies, and books. And just as a point of disclosure, I have interviewed Dr. Charney any number of times on a host of subjects. Just to her immediate right is Annette Stevens. She is a certified public accountant, has been here in Tucson for 19 years, and has worked for her family's accounting firm for the past 28 years. To her right is Dr. Eric Schindler. Dr. Schindler is a clinical psychologist who's president and CEO of Child Family Resources, a local nonprofit organization that improves the well-being of Arizona's children and families through programs that strengthen child care, youth, and families. And again, as a point of reference, I've done a number of stories with the Child and Family Resources organization as well. And then Jim Murphy is a former Pima County supervisor and Tucson City Council member. He serves as president and CEO of the Pima Council on Aging, the designated area agency on aging serving older adults and their families living in Pima County, Arizona. And again, a point of disclosure, I've interviewed Jim on a number of occasions as well, so I know all of these folks. And so, Dr. Charney, we'll let you begin with an opening statement, if you would.
Before our CPA describes the details of the flat tax to you, I wanted to make sure that people understand our current income tax structure. What we have is called an increasing or a progressive block rate tax structure. And what that means is after you make some subtractions, excuse my, I'm tongue-tied, the first $20,000 for a married couple is taxed at one rate. I think it's 2.59%. The next $30,000 is 2.88%, and so on and so forth, up to income over $300,000 per year, and that's taxed at the highest rate of 4.54%. So just so that you understand, what we currently have is what's called an increasing rate block structure. And a flat tax does just what you would expect. It gets rid of that entire increasing rate block structure, imposes a flat tax. Same rate on all income at all levels. It's not new that the Arizona legislature has flattened the taxes. This is sort of going full gusto to completely flatten it. But in fact, they somewhat flattened it 7 times between 1990 and 2007. Each time they reduced each of these rates in these 5 block structures by a percentage. Well, simple math tells you a percentage cut of a high rate is a bigger cut than a percentage cut of a low rate. So they have flattened the tax 7 times. And further, by cutting the income tax, they have shifted the overall emphasis in the general fund from an income tax, which currently has this progressive rate structure, to the sales tax, which is the poster child of a regressive tax. The sales tax is called regressive tax because at each income level, it takes a bigger chunk of the budget for low-income families than it does high-income families. So they have cut the income tax and therefore reduced the emphasis on that. They have increased the emphasis on the sales tax, And at the same time, they have flattened the income tax through these 7 tax changes over the years. Now, this not only just shifts burden, it's a massive shift in burden over the years from highest income individuals to low and middle income individuals. But in addition to that, it has a macroeconomic effect. Low income people, by their very nature, have to spend all their income. They just don't have a choice. High income individuals can save some. So by shifting tax burden from high income individuals to low and middle income families, the result is a decrease in overall demand in the state. And this current recession is in fact a crisis of demand. So this will serve to sort of further dampen the demand in the state as those in the higher income getting a tax break will save some of it. So those are my comments, just general economic effect of these taxes, and our CPA has far more specific numbers.
And last but not least, to show up this evening, a little bit late, but we're very happy that he's here, Reverend Grady Scott. He moved to Tucson in 1984. He's been senior pastor at Grace Temple Baptist Church for nearly 21 years. Thank you very much for being here. We really do appreciate it. We'll hear from him in just a moment, but now let's hear from Annette Stevens.
Okay. I analyzed the flat tax bill, and I'm just here to share with you a few of my findings. The proponents of the flat tax bill say that it will simplify your taxes because it takes away many of the deductions that can make your tax return complicated. But under the flat tax bill, you still must compute your federal adjusted gross income. You still have to recalculate depreciation using Arizona rules, which are vastly different from the federal rules, and you still have to figure out your tax credits. If you speak to any seasoned tax preparer, they can tell you that these 3 items are some of the most complicated portions of filling out an individual income tax returns. The tax credits, there's over 25 of them here in the state of Arizona. Some of them you've seen, where they're the school tax credits, they're very simple. They still require 2 forms on your tax return. The more complicated ones can be very cumbersome. If you've ever tried to take the rain barrel tax credit, that's a very cumbersome tax credit. So the flat tax proponents, what they've done is they've taken on 2 lines of your individual tax return, the front page. They've taken on 2 lines of the front page. You recalculate the depreciation, then you have to wade through over 200 tax credits, and then they have the audacity to call it simplification. The other thing that that was being pointed out earlier is that some income that is currently not taxable is going to become taxable under the flat income tax provision. Currently, our military, let's just look at the military. Military pensioners, under the state of Arizona current law, the first $2,500 that you earn in military retirement is not taxable. Under the flat tax, it will be fully taxable. Our military personnel, the U.S. Armed Forces, our reservists, and the National Guardsmen, they're exempt from taxes right now. They don't have to pay any tax on their active duty pay. Under the flat tax, it's fully taxable. The flat tax does away with many of the deductions. You've heard about the mortgage interest deduction, that's gone. The real estate taxes are gone. Your charitable contributions are gone. One I found peculiar is your gambling losses are going to be not deductible, but your gambling winnings will still be taxable. Your medical expenses will not be deductible under the flat tax. The exemptions for your personal and for your children, those of you that have elderly parents, grandparents, great-grandparents that you have to take care of with their daily living, that qualified relative deduction is gone. The flat tax does not allow a deduction for being age 65 or older or for being blind. One of the ones that also doesn't make sense is the Arizona income tax. Right now we have a 2-year system to deduct your Arizona income tax that you actually pay. In year 1, you take a deduction for your federal taxes withheld from your paycheck, and if you had too much withheld, in year 2 that refund becomes income, so that the net effect is you take a deduction for the actual amount of taxes that you pay. Under the flat tax, you lose the year 1 deduction, of the Arizona withholding that's being taken out of your paycheck, but you still have to, in year 2, pick up the Arizona refund. So under the flat tax, the net effect is that you're paying Arizona income tax on the Arizona income tax withheld from your paycheck. The proponents of the flat tax say it's a fair tax because everyone pays their fair share. Under the current Arizona law, a single person whose Arizona adjusted gross income is less than $5,500 does not have to file an income tax return or pay Arizona income tax. Under the flat tax, all Arizona residents with any Arizona income is going to have to file a tax return. That means children will now have to file tax returns under the flat tax. My son earned $830 working in the summer. He's a teenager. Under the current law, he didn't have to file a federal or Arizona income tax return. But under the flat tax, my son will have to file a tax return to pay $18 to $25 worth of tax on his $830 worth of summer earnings. And me as a parent, now I have to file a tax return for my son. Okay? What about a 5-year-old? His grandparents have put $5,000 in his savings. He's got a $50 interest income. Under the flat tax, this 5-year-old will now have to file a tax return and pay his $1 or $2 worth of Arizona income tax. The reason I got involved in this whole forum here is because I was thinking about the elderly. They're the ones that have bothered me the most. As a tax preparer, I sit there and they come into my office all the time. I had recently had a widow that came in. Her husband had passed away. Her neighbor says, "You better get your taxes done. You have to go." She came to me, the first words out of her mouth is, "I don't want to go to jail." And I looked at her income and I was able to figure it out. She had $4,000 worth of income from the Ford Motor Company, a retirement pay. She had about $8,000 worth of Social Security. I looked at it and I explained it all to her and told her, "You don't have to file a tax return, federal or Arizona. Your income is too low." This woman with $12,000 worth of income looked at me and she says, "Well, are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm sure." And then she wanted to pay me for it. How could I ask her to pay me? This woman who makes $12,000 pay me to do her return. But I will tell you, under the flat tax, this woman with $4,000 worth of pension from the Ford Motor Company will have to file an Arizona income tax return, pay anywhere from $85 to $120 to do for her taxes, and pay me $90 to do her tax return. That's what the flat tax bill does. The flat tax bill adds a tax and a paperwork burden to the most vulnerable in our society, the young and the aged.
When we came in, and I just met Annette this evening, she said, "I'm just nobody, I'm just an accountant." And I said, "Well, we need to know the numbers." Well, we really know the numbers now, and you are somebody. I'm really impressed by you. Next, Dr. Eric Schindler.
It's always intimidating when you have to follow a great speaker. I wasn't sure what I was going to say tonight. I had several thoughts and ways I was going to go, and then when I came in here, it kind of crystallized in my mind, because I was asked by the senator to talk not numbers per se, but more impact. And so what I want to do is ask you to think about something, and I'm really anxious to hear the questions that come up later in our panel. Who should pay for physical therapy and counseling for an autistic child who comes from a very poor family? And who should pay for food for a hungry family that happens to live here in Tucson and lost their job? And who should pay for a senior companion to go into the home of, let's say, a disabled senior citizen who happens to be very low income and have some medical challenges? Well, if you think about this, there's no real right answer. Most people would probably conclude that it ought to be a combination of government and charitable contributions. Now, you would probably have some people on the libertarian side who would say that they ought not to, that's not a role for government, but my general sense as a person who's been running a nonprofit organization and working in the nonprofit sector for 200 years, it seems like, is that most people think that there's a role for government in taking care of those less fortunate. Now, the proportion is debatable. Should it be all government that meets those needs. And I just picked those three just because I saw my colleague who runs the food bank in the audience, Will Carnegie, and my colleague here, Jim, who runs FEMA Council on Aging, and our organization provides services to that hypothetical kid with autism who needs treatment and comes from a very poor family. Plenty of other examples. So what's the right proportion? I don't know. I don't know that it should be, 85% government and 15% charitable contributions by people. Maybe the fraction should be 70-30. We're not really here to debate that one per se tonight. But I do know this, that our legislature in past sessions has really focused on saying, well, it's not the role of government to do this. And they've cut funds dramatically. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars that have been sucked out of services to needy children and families over the last several years. So as the recession's hit and more people have been in need, there's been less money available to meet the needs. There's a little perfect storm. And the reality is that there hasn't been more charitable giving to make up the full amount. There's been some, but there's just not enough money. For example, in my organization, we provide over $10 to $12 million of services in Pima County to a variety of people and children and families. So there's just not $5 million of charitable giving, even if every penny went to our organization. And there's thousands of other needy people and dozens of other organizations. So you can never get the ratio, 100% charitable giving. There has to be a role for government, or the whole system will implode. So the problem with the flat tax is that it disincentivizes people to contribute to charitable organizations. How much? I don't know, but the truth is that people give to charities because they get the tax deduction. And that's not even talking about the tax credit for the working poor or for schools. That is a dollar-for-dollar reduction that is pretty much exclusively done to lessen your tax bill. Yeah, I did a little bit of homework. I talked to a colleague from Children's Action Alliance who is much more knowledgeable about the research, and I said to her, well, tell me, so in Arizona, how much money goes for deductions for charitable organizations? I know, looking around this room here, we have a crowd of compassionate people, and each of you gives money to charities of your choice, and you tend to itemize and deduct that. What's it all worth across the state? And she said, you know what? That's actually a harder question to research than you would think. It's not like there's an easy answer, but she's a policy wizard, lives up in Phoenix, and what she found out is that the latest you can know the answer to that question is 2005. But at least in 2005, there was $100 million of charitable tax given, charitable credit claimed across the whole state for contributions to nonprofit organizations, and another $31 million that was goods and services, like you donate to Goodwill and so forth. So there's $131 million that is going to be taken away in some proportion. I mean, it's an empirical question. If now you can't deduct the money, would you cut your charitable giving in half? Would it go away? Would it not matter at all? It's interesting questions that we don't know the answers to, but it would be a terrible experiment to find out the hard way. Because it's going to go down. It's not going to go up, for sure. I mean, we could speculate how much it would go up. So I think that's really all I need to say. I mean, this is... we're trying to promote self-sufficiency in the clients that we work with, and we need the help of charitable deductions to do so. So to tie that piece to this flat tax business doesn't necessarily make empirical sense. You could imagine a scenario where you could do a flat tax with all the other problems that you're learning from the experts here, but it's almost mean-spirited to take the charitable contributions piece, and maybe it speaks to another agenda, which is to, kind of feels like those people who are not rich are under siege right now in our state. So I'll look forward to questions later. Thank you.
Dr. Schindler, thank you very much. And now Jim Murphy from the FEMA Council on Aging. Jim?
It just reminds me of an article a while back. I think it was the President of the Senate who was quoted as saying that the government shouldn't do anything, it should be individuals, churches, and the community. Well, that's all of it. I mean, there are not enough volunteer hours, you know, to do everything that needs to be done, and that's one of the other things that everybody says, well, let volunteers do it. And we're blessed at Pima Council on Aging. I see a number here tonight who volunteer. Without volunteers, we could not exist, and I know many of the other nonprofits couldn't either, and provide service that we do. So it's very important. And when you talk about seniors and older adults, nobody knows who we are or what age is senior or anything anymore. It's really all blurred. Before talking specifically about the flat tax, I'd just like to give us a couple of statistics that puts the aging of our nation really in kind of perspective. In the last 10 years, the population of Pima County grew about 16%. The population 65 and older grew 26.6%, and those 85 and older 52%. Obviously, that 85 and older are a smaller number, but that number is getting larger and larger every year. Also in Pima County, about 43% of the population are either boomers or those 65 and older. That's almost half the population in Pima County. So we hear about the boomers all the time, and it's hard to get a handle on the boomers. We talk about that 10-year period. A number I heard recently helped put it in perspective, and I've heard it from a couple sources, so I guess it's pretty good. And that is, beginning this year, each and every day, 10,000 individuals will turn 65. 10,000 individuals every day turning 65. Again, putting this whole issue of the aging of the population in a little perspective. 22% of those over 65 need some form of long-term care. 71% report at least one chronic condition. Arizona, again, on the wrong side of the scale, rates 11th in the rate of food insecurity for seniors. Elderly women are more likely to live alone, and aging is really disproportionately a woman's issue like so many others. Many women can expect to live as widows 15 to 20 years, and a larger number of women today than in the past have no children. So it just kind of, I think, sets a little bit the issue of aging and aging at a time when government and that safety net that used to be there as a partnership with nonprofits, as Eric talked about, is getting less and less. And what do we do as a society? What do we do as a society that's aging? In terms of the flat tax, many seniors pay no state income tax right now because of their medical expenses, including Medicare premiums, Medicare supplement insurance, long-term care insurance, dentist bills, hearing aid costs. It reduces the taxable income to zero. The proportionate flat tax eliminates all of those medical deductions. The head of the Center for Economic Research at Cochise College wrote just recently about Senate Bill 2636 that worries the senator and everybody else. It passed the House and unfortunately died in the Senate. Wrote about this, and let me quote just a little bit from his evaluation of the flat tax. So the poor do currently pay toward the cost of government. Under the present system, wealthier households pay a larger portion of their income towards state income tax, but lower income households pay a greater share of their income towards sales tax. So we're talking about a regressive sort of thing. Because a flat tax proposal keeps some business deductions but eliminates entirely the standard deduction and keeps credits more likely to be taken by the wealthier, the proponent's goal of income proportional taxation would be undermined and the tax would become regressive. Lower income households would end up paying a larger share of their income towards the income tax than wealthier households, just as they do with the state's main revenue, the sales tax. Perhaps the biggest losers will be those making less than $15,000 who would be pulled into the tax system, as has been mentioned several times. We see so often individuals, disproportionately women, in their 70s and 80s with incomes of $700 to $1,000 a month. Now, none of us can live and take care of all of our necessity on that kind of income. Even those who have a little higher income household with lots of non-business deductions would also lose big. For example, seniors with larger medical expense deductions. The biggest winners would be wealthier households who do not currently claim large deductions or whose deductions are business related. So again, wealthier seniors and low-income seniors fare badly under the Arizona flat tax proposal. Middle-class elderly also will pay more. No matter which way you look at it, we all lose.
Thank you, Jim. Scott.
First, good evening. It's great to be here, and thank you for permitting me to represent the faith-based community here this evening. The downturn in the economy has affected every one of us, but for those who are on the edge of falling over the edge, this economy has been devastating. The poor and the underemployed are suffering greatly in our community. And churches are beginning, and churches and places of faith are beginning to see more people coming with needs that the churches and the faith community cannot meet because we're all suffering from a downturn in the economy. This flat tax rate is going to affect the faith community maybe even more than other communities because our total income comes from contributions. As those contributions go down, the services we can provide also decrease. And it makes it harder for the churches when we see people coming with legitimate needs. And when I say legitimate needs, I don't mean I want to buy a new car. I want to stay in my house. I want to feed my children. My utilities are going to be turned off. Those are the issues that we're facing. Those are the people who are coming day after day. When I first started pastoring 20 years ago, you might get one call a week, maybe one call every 2 weeks. We're getting calls almost daily for people who've tried everything they know how to do to stay above water. And sometimes they're saying, I don't know where else to go. It seems kind of wrong to, immoral, I was going to say wrong, immoral, to take the lower income people of our community and tell them your needs are not our concern. What made America great was not equal sacrifice, but shared sacrifice. All of us working together to make our community greater. What people forget a lot of times is that the faith community is our community. It's our people working together to make Tucson a better place, Arizona a better place to live. If you impose a flat tax that's going to increase the discretionary or decrease the discretionary income of the average person and eliminate the charitable contribution portion of the tax, what you're doing is a double whammy, if you will. We're saying we're going to give you no deduction and we're going to increase your tax rate. What we have to understand also is that our money, the money that charitable or faith-based communities receive, is all discretionary. I really don't like to say this, but you don't have to go to church. You don't have to go to synagogue. You don't have to go to mosque. You can, if there's an area where it has to be cut, those kinds of decisions, while may not be the decision you would like to make, it might be the decision that you have to make. So what I'm going to ask everyone here to do is to consider the impact that this will have on our community. Those who are already suffering are going to suffer even more. And we as people of faith, we as people of a community, to realize that all of us come together and make this country great. We should not penalize people for not having necessarily the income that we have. So sometimes ideas sound good. When you look at them on paper, they sound like, oh, this is a great thing, we ought to do it. But when you really look at what this is going to do, it's going to hurt more than help. I hope this won't become part of our legacy, that Arizona again leads the nation in doing something nobody else would ever consider doing. and that's hurting poor people. So thank you for your time.
And I'm not sure what you were expecting this evening. I'm sure that many of you understood that the panelists here would be speaking on one side of the flat tax issue, and it's information about the flat tax. But I did want to ask a question here, if I may. How many people here favor the flat tax? If you could just give me a show of hands of the number of people. There are a few. 3. So that's about, what, 1% of the folks here. But what I would recommend you do, if you would, is challenge our panelists, since you are essentially taking a different point of view. And I would recommend that you do that. If you have not submitted questions, I would encourage you to do that so we could have some conversation about that side. But now I want to start with the questions, and I found this one to be really a very interesting one, and I think, Dr. Charney, this probably fits into something that you would know. What happens to business deductions? Will corporations pay at the same rate?
I think that's better for the certified public accountant.
Oh, okay, we'll go with we'll go with the net on that then.
Well, the corporations have a different tax rate. Theirs is already a flat tax rate. And so they are paying taxes on their net profit, so they already get their deductions for the corporations.
So if I could, this flat tax bill 2636 that was proposed does not impact corporations. This is individuals and businesses that file as individuals and not as corporations.
So even though the U.S. Supreme Court says corporations are people, according to the flat tax, corporations are not people. Now, whomever would, I guess we'll do it that way, whomever would like to answer this question, raise your hand. I get a $600 tax credit for my donation to a private school. Will I still be able to get this? What tax credits remain? Can low-income people use tax credits? So this continues on, and if you need more explanation of this question or different pieces, I'll reread it for you. And explain the difference between tax credits and deductions. And I like that last part. Explain the difference between tax credits and deductions, because I'm kind of unclear on that myself.
Okay, it does not change the tax credits. They were not in any way affected by the flat tax. So the $600 school tax credit is still going to be a credit for you. The difference between a credit and a deduction it's a very big difference. A deduction reduces your taxable income. So let's say you give $1,000 to a charity. It reduces your income by $1,000, and then you take that and you multiply that times whatever your tax rate is, okay? A tax credit is $1 for $1, so that if you give $1,000 to the school tax credit and you're married and you have at least $1,000 as taxes, you can take $1,000 off of your income tax bill. So none of that changes. As far as the poor goes, when I gave the example of this widow who would have to pay the Arizona income tax of $85, if she was to give $85 to the community food bank, which is a specific charity that we have a tax credit for in the state of Arizona, if she was to give $85 to the community food bank, she would take that $85 off of her Arizona taxes and pay $0 to the state of Arizona. Does that answer?
Well, thank you very much. And that is one of the questions. I'd like to comment on the potential impact of the community food bank.
I think the other part of the question was, do well-off individuals use tax credits more often than lower income or middle class?
Well, the tax credits are used by the people who have the more income for the most part.
So those remain. I thought this one was interesting as well. What about proposing the fair tax? And we've heard that talked about before, the fair tax being a form of consumption tax, instead of what we have now, or the proposed flat tax. I know that we're not talking about the consumption tax tonight, but it is kind of an alternative, I think, to the flat tax. Dr. Charney?
Well, the fair tax has been proposed at the federal level and as a national sales tax. And as far as I can tell, they're not planning on imposing it even as a value-added tax, which would make a little more sense to me. A fair tax is simply a national sales tax that would substitute for other forms of taxes. And as far as I can gather, it would usually take about 25% sales tax rate to make up for income taxes that they want to substitute it for. So every time you would walk in to buy something, you would pay an additional 25% on anything you buy. Now, a lot of countries have what's called a value-added tax, which can get fairly high, but one advantage of the value-added tax is that it levels the playing field according to who produces what where. So that if you produce it here in this country, you're paying the same tax on that item as if it's produced overseas. Right now, corporations in the U.S. have to pay taxes in the U.S., some at least, but if something is imported from somewhere else, those companies have paid zero taxes. So they have talked about a value-added type tax as sort of helping to level that playing field, but I don't think anybody is talking so much about a value-added as much as they are on this so-called fair tax or a 25% sales tax.
Is that a fair tax, 25%? I mean, is it fair? I mean, that's
fair
what they call
is
it.
who you are. I mean, again, the sales tax is a poster child, as I said before, of a regressive tax. So, and it also depends on how it's applied, because in Arizona, of course, we tax things. We don't tax services. On your water bill, you will tax the water because you're getting a commodity, but the sewer isn't taxed because they're taking something away. So that's a service that isn't taxed, whereas the water bill is taxed. At least the last time I checked. That's the way it used to be. If it's changed, I know my water bill's really gone up, so maybe they are taxing sewer these days. I don't know. Fair tax depends on who you are, and obviously high-income people have a portion that they can save. Number one. Number two, so they don't have to spend it all. Therefore, they don't have to pay as much in a fair tax out of their income.
And this is for any of you who would like to take this. You said that it was revenue neutral, the flat tax. What does that mean?
I better do one, because otherwise the extra will be talking all night. Revenue neutral means that there is a tax shift. There will be no extra revenue for the state of Arizona that is gained from the flat tax. It just gives a tax cut to higher income individuals, and then requires a tax cut, the exact amount, a tax increase from the 8 individuals to offset. All right, let's get this right. 8 individuals will pay more to offset the tax cut for the 1 individual. It's the same amount. There's going to be a commission created that's going to determine what the percentage is, so we get the exact tax cut is the same amount as the tax increase on these individuals. And that way, if the legislature does it that way, guess what happens when they do it that way? You don't get to vote on it. It's a tax increase for 8 out of 9, but you don't get to vote on it because it's revenue neutral. And that's the part that galls me. So many individuals are going to be impacted by this, but you don't get to have a say. And that's the whole point of these forums, is to educate you enough to understand what this flat tax is so you can have a say. We are so fortunate that we have this 6-month period here in which to educate the public. This tax came so close to passing in March, and you would not have known it. Your taxes would have gone up, and that would have been that. But now we have this 6-month period where, fortunately, I've got a great committee of individuals out here, and we're working really hard to create forums and talk to business communities and individuals about the impact. So revenue neutral, you don't get to vote, but you get to talk to your legislators. You've got 6 months to do that.
Well, and that begs this follow-up. How in the world did such a proposal come about to raise taxes on most residents of the state and still not add revenue to help in these difficult economic times? How in the world did this come about, is this question.
You know, this is the pain of working in the Arizona State Legislature, is that some people get to propose bills and some people don't. And this is the majority leader in the House of Representatives. He's with the ruling party, and so he has a lot of clout. And his colleagues won't vote against him because he's the majority leader. And there's a very much a, you pat my back, I'll pat your back. So all the majority members in the House voted yes on this bill, on this flat tax bill, and sent it over to the Senate. I asked the sponsor when he came before the Senate Finance Committee, I said, so why are you running this bill that's going to hurt so many people? And he testified in public, and he said, I've always wanted to do this. I think it's a great idea. I said, but what about the individuals? And if you look at this beige sheet, it shows the individuals that are going to be impacted the most. I said, what about the individuals that don't currently pay taxes right now, but the flat tax is going to raise their tax $200? And he said, well, $200 isn't that much. And you know, some people laugh and some people don't. He just doesn't understand what it's like to have $5 in your wallet. And you've got to get through a couple of weeks and make that $5 stretch. To him, from where he was looking, and he's not a bad person, not by any means, but that inability to fully understand the impact to individuals who have so little just wasn't reaching his awareness, his compassion, and his consciousness. So for him, it was a great idea. It's in his thinking, it's a great idea. But we showed him this chart. This chart came from the Department of Revenue. We showed it to him during the committee. Millionaires are going to get a tax cut. Middle-class families are going to get a tax increase. He said, but it's a great idea.
What's his name?
Is the proposed rate, what was the rate, 20? What, 2.13%? Is the proposed rate guaranteed for the future, or can it increase? And who will decide the rate, and if in fact it needs to be increased?
Raising taxes in Arizona is almost impossible. We have a ratchet effect in the state. We voters passed a law that said that all tax increases have to be approved by a supermajority in the state legislature. And so the effect of this is that a simple majority can cut taxes all they want, and you can never regain it through a tax increase. So we've had a ratcheting down of tax rates over the years. And again, all you need is half plus one to get that tax cut in, but it is virtually impossible, almost, to get a tax increase. Because it takes 2/3. But that was voter passed.
Go ahead, Annette.
I'm sorry. According to the bill, it says that the person or the group of individuals who will choose the tax rate for the state of Arizona will be those 5 individuals on the Economic Estimates Commission, and that the bill states that they can take the tax rate all the way up to 3%. It has to be revenue neutral, so they will figure it out. So this committee is the one that will choose. It is not 2.13%. We don't know exactly who it is. This committee consists of the department head of the Arizona Department of Revenue, 2 knowledgeable economics appointed by the Speaker of the House, and two people knowledgeable in the field of economics that are appointed by the President of the Senate.
Is that the
Paula, I
current
think-
Economic Estimates Commission?
Yeah, if any of you others want to jump in here, we'd be more than happy to.
No,
I realize that many of them are procedural questions and such,
There's a
and not
seated-
philosophical.
I'm sorry, I was incorrect. It is the Economic Estimation Committee these three people, one person chosen, but then they add two more in the bill. So it's the same as what I said, but it's not the actual committee. There's some actual two other people appointed to that committee. Does that make sense?
Senator Bout, this is probably in your league. The Republicans in the legislature have the votes to pass the flat tax plan. You've already said that. They have a supermajority.